The world is indeed full of peril, and there are many dark places, but still there is much that is fair. And though in all lands love is now mingled with grief, it grows perhaps the greater. These words are uttered by Galadriel in the movies of The Lord of the Rings, and in the book, it's uttered by a different elf, Haldir. But the line itself, in either way, I think speaks of a great truth and something that I have in particular been reflecting on as I come to the end of my first year as a campus chaplain at a college. Many of the students are preparing to, graduate, move on with their lives, and in many ways now there is grief for them, for me, because they've become a part of my life. They've been very dear to me, and so there is grief there. And I think where we think of the word grief, we oftentimes tend to associate it with a purely negative experience. When we lose a loved one, we experience grief at their loss, and there's something of a bit of like shame that we grieve. And there's perhaps a bit of us that feels like we shouldn't have to do this, that we should just be able to get over it and move forward. But I think what I love about this quote from Tolkien is that it explains to us that really grief makes love all the richer, and perhaps even explains exactly what it means to us. And I think in that way we can perhaps try to grow in our own understanding of how does grief, love, and all those things connect. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I shared it with somebody, and they were struck by it, so I thought I would share it with all of you, because why not? And that is that in many ways grief is making additions to our hearts. That is, it's expanding our hearts, growing our hearts in such a way that we are able to hold all the people, all the experience we've had there, and still continue to give ourselves openly to others. So it's a sort of expanding, if it's done well, of our hearts, so that we can embrace the new, but then also be able to properly place the old, and for the old to not grow diminished or less, but instead for it to actually have a space in our hearts, while still making more space for new people, new experiences, and God's love to grow in us in different ways. And I think that is an important part that we don't often understand about grief. It is a good thing. It's a necessary experience for us to have. I said in the past that if I were ever to write a book, it would be called To Live is to Grieve. Because in order for us to truly live as God desires for us to live, we have to keep on always moving forward. We have to allow the past to be the past, use the past to help us learn how we are to act in the present, and ultimately face the future by becoming better men and women, and by learning to love others better. That is ultimately the task of our lives. And I find in grief that there is something deeply beautiful in its tears, in the difficulties that it poses, and in the letting go we have to do in order to truly grieve. We come to understand just how much others mean to us, how these experiences have shaped us, and also how we can use those experiences, remember those people, to help us to love others better in the future, to embrace what the Lord has laid before us, in all sincerity and all truth and all goodness. And in that way, our love grows the greater, as the quote from Tolkien points out. That there is a lot of evil in the world, that a lot of times grief can come from an experience of evil, the loss of a loved one, the ending of a friendship due to either our wrongdoing or the wrongdoing of another, the diminishment of experiences because we have to move into something new. But still there is much that is fair. There is much for us to experience yet, that God's love and goodness come through so very clearly. And so in that, if we learn to love in our grief, to properly place the people that we leave behind, that we perhaps lose as much contact with, grow distant from, that they're never truly gone from our hearts if we learn to make grief an opportunity for an expansion of our heart to embrace new people, new experiences, what God offers us in the present. That indeed our love not merely stays the same, but it perhaps grows the greater and becomes ever more beautiful.